Hello, welcome. I think we're about ready to start here. Welcome to this History Speaks on the Air here at the Marathon County Historical Society. Thanks for joining us in this Halloween afternoon. Thanks to our sponsors for this event. History Speaks series that we do is sponsored by Compass Properties and Janke's Bookstore, who have allowed us to develop this. And I want to also thanks to our members and everybody who supports us as well. Usually at this time of year, we would be getting ready for our holiday events and our volunteer appreciation and members sort of things. Unfortunately, may not be the same this year, but we are very grateful to all of you who make this possible and support the telling and preserving of history here at the Historical Society. And with that, I think I will invite Kathy to join the call here. There she is. All right. All right, that's all. And you want to just screen share, make sure you're doing that.
Okay, we're ready to go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be giving you my non-scholarly insight into how our ancestors reacted to and dealt with death. Many of the items and the pictures that you're going to see are from my personal collection. I do have quite an extensive collection of post-mortem photos, casket plates, and other things related to death and mourning. So just to reiterate, I am not a professor of death. This is not my occupation or my education. I am just a person who really enjoys learning about how we as society have handled death through the years and sharing my collection. And I am going to point out, this is a warning. My presentation does include pictures of dead people, and that will include adults, children, and babies. So if you have an aversion to that, you probably don't want to continue. Although it's nothing gruesome, there are no murder or accident scenes, there's no blood and gore, it's just very tasteful pictures of dead people from the last 150 years or so. So I'm just going to start with a very brief explanation of how death attitudes evolved, and I'm going to do this in just a couple slides. For many centuries, death and the afterlife were something that was to be feared. The fire and brimstone imagery, burning in hell, and those attitudes really were reflected in the headstones. And you can see a couple of them here. These are from the East Coast. We have the winged skull, the skeleton, skull and crossbones. It was a very kind of dismal and gruesome existence. And burial grounds were often just that. They were a place to bury a body. They were often not organized. They most likely weren't landscaped, and in general, they just weren't a very welcoming place for visitors. Pre-1860 references in the Wausau newspapers refer to what we would now call a cemetery as the burial ground. And the editors of the newspaper were frequently commenting on how unkempt the burial ground looked. This is Queen Victoria, for whom the Victorian era was named. She reigned from 1837 to 1901. And Victorians, of course, were known for doing everything elaborately. Their clothes, their food, their rituals, symbolism, the manners, everything bigger the better. And with the death of Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, in 1861, Victoria publicly mourned in ways that had not been seen before. She was very visual with her mourning, and her mourning rituals were copied by women around the world. And some of those mourning rituals continued well past the point of her reign, and some of them even continue to now. And we'll talk about those a little bit later in the presentation. Death had really transitioned from the fire and brimstone concept to the concept of death being a better life, a place that you would go that was better than where you had been, a reunion with the people who had gone before you. And this, in some references, is referred to as the good death, if death can be good, but it was going to a better place. The headstone that you see here is from Pine Grove Cemetery in Wausau, and the symbolism that's on here is the gates of heaven, which are opening. So this was symbolic of the entry into this better life. And cemeteries themselves had changed a lot. They had gone from becoming just a place to bury the dead to becoming places that were well manicured and had walking paths and riding paths. And they were really becoming a very restful place that families would gather on Sundays after church to commune with their relatives that had departed. So while few people in the 19th century Wisconsin would have had the resources to implement some of the very grand Victorian mourning rituals, people, I'm sure, did the best they could with what they had. They wanted to be fashionable just like we do now. When clothing styles changed now, we adopt them. Same thing happened 150 years ago. Funeral homes didn't exist yet. Although most towns, or many towns, would have had an undertaker to help take care of some of the things that had to be done. And death was really a part of life, and it was something that had to be dealt with when it happened. And it happened a lot. And when it did, death care was often provided just by family and friends in your home. They would wash the body and dress it. They would lay you out, invite family and friends to come over and take care of burying your body. So even though death was very common, families still grieved just like they do now. There's this misconception that because death happened a lot in the past, that families kind of became immune to it or numb to it, and I don't think that's it at all. It was especially difficult when you had multiple family members who were dying, especially children, when there were epidemics that were sweeping through. And it wasn't at all uncommon for rural families to have a small cemetery on their property. Several of these family cemeteries still exist in Marathon County. Several of them have just family that are buried in them, just a handful of people, and other cemeteries have morphed into community cemeteries where anyone could be buried. So in 1860, sadly, if you were a parent, you could expect to lose about a third of your children by the age of 5. By 1900, that had lowered just a little bit. You could expect to lose 2 out of every 5 children. So death was very prevalent for children. Locally, we had epidemics of smallpox and diphtheria, scarlet fever, influenza, and other really contagious diseases that claimed the lives of a lot of children and also many adults. There was a lot of death to deal with, especially when you had multiple generations of families that were living in one home. If one person came home with something, say scarlet fever, it very easily could sweep through the entire home, and everyone would not survive. Overall life expectancy in 1860 was about 39 years, which is not that much. If you were able to survive until your 10th birthday, your life expectancy went up to about 58 years. And death notices were very common in newspapers. People wanted to know which of their neighbors had died and were in mourning. This is from a local paper, 1862, the Central Wisconsin, and this is a death notice for 2 children. Both are less than 2 years old. One died from scarlet fever and the other died from an unknown cause. Early death notices were very brief and to the point. It really was little information other than enough to let your neighbors know that you had a death in your family. A lot of them will include the cause of the death, which was important, especially during epidemic times, so you knew who to stay away from. This death notice from 1869 from the Wausau pilot includes more information about the personality and the moral character of the deceased. So this is more of a nod towards the good death. The very first line tells you about the person. This is Alice May Tuttle, who was 10 years old when she died. And the very first sentence after her vital statistics says, the subject of the above notice was an amiable and gentle child, was possessed of judgment and ability far beyond her years, and was beloved by all with whom she associated. So things are getting more flowery. The tone has changed considerably. This is the total opposite of the fire and brimstone view of death. And this is from the Wausau pilot again from 1870, one of the sadder death announcements that I've seen. This is for 6 children, 6 babies, ranging in age from 12 days to 3 months old. Notices at this point, we're starting to include some poetry, which you can see several stanzas at the bottom of this one. And it's often poetry about angels guiding children to heaven. This is another clear representation of the good death concept. And this is 1874. There is yet another scarlet fever epidemic in Wausau, and I'm just going to read this. This is just heartbreaking to me. This terrible disease is again in our midst, and we were informed yesterday that 2 of Alex McPhail's children had died with it within 2 days, and that the third and only one left was not expected to live. Up to the time of going to press, we have not learned whether it is alive or not. This is a sad bereavement, and if the present one dies, he is childless, as he lost one last spring. The sympathy of the whole community is with Mr. McPhail and family. Cannot this terrible disease be checked? The helplessness of the community is just so apparent here. There really is nothing that they can do when these epidemics sweep through the town. And this is from Pine Grove Cemetery in Wausau again. This is a double monument for 2 children who died within close proximity time-wise. This is one for 3 children who died. There is also one for 4 children who died. Death notices for adults could be a little bit different. They often included a bit more information. This one is not so much a death notice as it is a body's been found notice. Contains some interesting details. This is David Kemp, 1869, who was presumed drowned 5 weeks earlier when he was running the falls. And if you look at the last line, it says, the remains were found partially buried in the sand and in a very good state of preservation, which of course is what everyone wants to know when they find that a body that they thought was drowned has been found. Sometimes death stories included some very gruesome details. This is 1871 again, the Wausau pilot, such as this story for Thomas Ewells, who died by suicide. And as the story notes, having slit his throat after showing indications that his mind was not clear and that something troubled him. It was not uncommon at all when there was kind of a gruesome death or one that was unusual, that there will be several days in a row in the newspaper where more and more of these gruesome details come out, and they just keep rehashing the story again and again. So you can get some very detailed accounts of what the body looked like, what people said, that people were walking through pools of blood on the floor as the police were trying to investigate. And as with most activities of life, death becomes business. Furniture makers were already constructing caskets as they were needed. So if someone in my family died, I would call a furniture maker. He would ask me what I wanted. He would build it for me. But they were started to stock pre-built models that were then customized with different fabrics on the inside and different hardware and finishes on the outside. So they would have a stock of these in their furniture store at the ready for when someone needed one. Embalming bodies became more widespread, of course, after the Civil War. It was something that was used quite extensively in the Civil War so that bodies of soldiers could be preserved for the trip home rather than having to be buried on a battlefield far away. Many casket makers added the service of embalming to their offerings, and undertakers started having a more active part in death care and funerals. And this really marks the point where caring for the dead moves from being something that the family took care of to something that you paid an undertaker to take care of. And this is one of those people in Wausau. This is Charles Helke. He was an early provider of death care in Wausau. He arrived here from Germany in 1871, and along with his father, August, started the Helke Furniture Company in Wausau in 1874. And as a furniture dealer, it was easy to add funeral goods and undertaking to your business. Making and upholstering caskets really wasn't a lot different than making upholstered furniture. This is an advertisement for the Charles Helke Furniture Company, noting that undertaking was a specialty, but that they also manufactured ice boxes, refrigerators, and all kinds of barroom fixtures. So they really had their hands in a lot of different things there at the furniture store. And this is the combined Helke furniture and undertaking business from about the 1890s. At this point, the funeral home as a separate business did not yet exist, and undertakers, when their services were needed, would travel to the home of the deceased to provide whatever service was wanted. It wasn't until 1926 that Helke's acquired a separate home that they used exclusively as an actual funeral parlor. And since undertaking was an on-the-go kind of business, they had to be prepared to travel with whatever tools were needed to take care of the body. So these are just a couple of them here. This is a cooling table, portable cooling table, which folded up into a kind of slim box with a carrying case. And this was literally used to cool the body after it had died. So the body would be laid out on here to cool. And then they could also use this if they were embalming the body or doing some prep work. If the family wanted to have the body embalmed, they would have handy their embalming machine. And of course, whether they could use, if it was electrical, depended on whether or not the family had electricity in their house. And portable organs were also something that was popular. On this bottle, the lid would flip down, the petals would flip up, and it would kind of go into a small box that could easily be carried. And this would have been taken to a home that didn't have a piano if the family wanted music during their visitation or service. And there were also undertaking supply catalogs, funeral home supply catalogs. And this one is, this page here is for a set of matching traveling accessories, one could say, for an undertaker. It has portable kneeler, portable candlesticks, portable candle holder, and the stand on the left is to hold prayer cards. And then in the back is an illuminated crucifix. And on a side note, when I saw this advertisement, I was incredibly excited because it turns out I, in my personal collection, possess the Saint Veronica illuminated crucifix, which stands in my living room. It's just lovely. And they also needed to take with them things to do makeup. This is some mortician's powder. In the middle are lip and cheek tints to give the body a bit more color. And then my personal favorite on the far right is something called Master Plastic, which I refer to as the original body putty. This was used for repairing deformities and for rebuilding missing tissues and features. So if you had some disease that ate away at your skin, Master Plastic could be used to fill in the missing skin. If you lost an ear, it could be used to recreate an ear for you. And in the back is a cooling board all folded up. And in the front, you can see some empty glass jars, and those originally held embalming fluid. The items in this slide and the last slide were both used at the Peterson Funeral Home in Wausau, the Peterson that is currently in town. And these are two photos. I'm going to show you two in a row that show what kind of work the undertaker did for a home funeral. So this is obviously a dead baby. And at this picture is the start of a parlor scene being created by the undertaker. The baby is dressed in a christening gown, which was very common, and laid out on an inclined table, and you can tell that it's just slightly tilted towards the viewer. And then what the undertaker does is embellish the scene, adding all of the flowers that have been sent to the home, placing the canopy above the viewing table, and it's just beautifully draped around the baby. And the undertaker really has set an absolutely beautiful scene here for this baby. And here's the two of them side by side, the before and the after. There was another undertaker in Wausau. There were actually many of them. This one in particular is Esch and Peterson. This is not the same Peterson that's in Wausau now. And they dealt with furniture and soft goods as their main line of business. So you can see on their billhead, furniture, carpets, lace curtains, and draperies. And then underneath that, undertakers and embalmers. In 1821, Wisconsin adopted statutes for licensing embalmers. And those who were already in business were grandfathered in, so they automatically got their license. But the statute says that men and women, which is interesting that they mention women, because one would not think that embalming and undertaking would necessarily be a job that would be promoted for women. But that men and women who wanted to practice what the statute called the art of embalming now required education. They had to do an apprenticeship with a licensed funeral home, and they had to take a test. Wisconsin had also adopted a statute that prohibited embalming people outside of a licensed funeral home or a private home. So what that did was force undertakers who were working out of their furniture store to move their funeral operation to a separate facility. And I'm just going to read a couple of the requirements here. The first one is to be licensed as an embalmer, you had to be at least 18 years of age. You need to have good moral character and temperate habits, and you had to have graduated from the 8th grade. So that, in addition to the apprenticeship and the test, are what you needed to become an embalmer. This is a 1925 advertisement for the Peterson and Krieger Funeral Home. So the 1921 statute changes were really the start of the funeral parlor concept for many undertakers. And they were called funeral parlors because when visitations were held in a home, they were typically done in the parlor, which is what we would refer to as the living room now. And the funeral industry as a business called them funeral parlors because they wanted to mimic the homey, home-like feel of having the body laid out in the home. And this is the last line of this advertisement, which says, the use of the funeral parlor is constantly becoming more universally accepted as the thing to do. So the funeral industry is trying to normalize taking death out of the home and bringing it into their business. And this really is also the final step in death care, doing just that, being removed from the family, being removed from the home, and being handled as a business. This 1931 ad for the same funeral home, Peterson's, is encouraging families to have funerals at Peterson's rather than at home. So it has been, what does that make it, 6 years since the last advertisement. We're going to talk a little bit about mourning customs now. And while society may have had prescribed mourning customs, the extent to which they were followed in particular communities really depended greatly on the location, your place in society, and your financial resources. So in 1870, a woman in central Wisconsin who had limited resources visually mourned much differently than a wealthy woman of society in Boston would have. So mourning traditions that started with Queen Victoria resulted in a lot of social rules and regulations. These, of course, were not laws. You didn't get arrested if you didn't follow them, but you may have been ostracized from society if you didn't follow them. Etiquette books at the time often contained many pages or even a whole chapter on the proper way to mourn. It covered everything from how long survivors had to be in mourning, what they had to wear, when and how they could enter society, what jewelry they could wear, what their stationery had to look like, and a lot more than that. So there are two distinct levels of mourning that really come up in any Victorian era etiquette book that you see. And the first one, it was called deep mourning, and this is what you were in when you first were bereaved. And this required an all-black wardrobe, and your fabrics had to be dull; they could not be shiny. And you could have crepe trimmings and a crepe veil covering your face. And crepe was a somewhat sheer, partially sheer, textured fabric, heavy fabric. And the veil would have to cover your face, and it can be, as you can see on the woman in the picture here, she has a very long crepe veil. Her bow under her hat is crepe, and then she has some crepe fabric trimming on her jacket. You were expected to wear no jewelry except for a wedding ring if you had one, and you could have very little social interaction. Typically, you were allowed, and I say that in quotes, you were allowed to go to church and you were allowed to go to other funerals because it was a somber occasion. You were not expected to go to any happy function because you were in a state of mourning. Your next stage of mourning would be half or second mourning, and that allowed for the wearing of black silk garments. So you weren't wearing all kinds of heavy black fabrics. You could lighten that up a little bit. You could lessen the amount of crepe that was trimming your fabric or trimming your clothing. You could get rid of the veil, and you could add little bits of jewelry that were pearl or dull black, nothing shiny again. And then near the end of your mourning, you could add touches of gray, white, and lavender fabrics, which were often added in hats or collars, things like that. So the rules also existed defining how long you had to be in those two stages of mourning. And I'm going to go through a couple of them here. The woman that you see in the picture here is likely in deep mourning. Women mourned for at least 2 years for a spouse, 1 year of deep mourning and 1 year of half mourning. So that's 2 years, which is a big chunk of your life. A parent for a child or a child for a parent was in deep mourning for 9 months and half mourning for 3 months. If one of your siblings died, you had 3 months of deep mourning and 3 months of half mourning. And then the more distant a relative got from you, the shorter the mourning period became. So for in-laws, aunts, uncles, cousins, and other relatives, it could be anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months, depending on the relationship. So as you can see, women could easily lose a year or two of their life if their husband died or anyone else close to them, only to have it start all over again when the next person died. And men wore a black armband for 6 weeks. They really got off easy in as far as etiquette goes, but a man, especially if he had young children, really had no time for mourning. He had to find and marry another woman so he had someone to take after his children. And it was not unusual for that someone to be the younger sister of his deceased wife. I'm just going to flip through some pictures of people in mourning. Even babies had prescribed mourning periods, which I find hard to believe made its way to central Wisconsin, but you never know. Babies were expected to wear white with black armbands. And then the woman on the left, this is a photo from Iowa. This woman is in full mourning. She has a lot of crepe embellishment on her hat and a very long crepe veil. There is also crepe fabric on her lapels and her cuffs. And fashion magazines for women had specific pages on a regular basis outlining the newest designs in mourning fashions and what you needed to have and how long you had to wear them. Most women could not afford to have an entire wardrobe of mourning clothing. Although the etiquette book suggested that if you were a woman of means, that's what you would have. And many wealthy women would in fact have a entirely black mourning wardrobe and a regular wardrobe. Normal women who did not have the means to do that may have had 1 or 2 dresses that they would rotate if they were going to be seen in public. Something you also need to keep in mind is that people in central Wisconsin in 1870, while the area is growing, there are still a lot of rural women, and they not only don't have the resources to have an entire wardrobe, but they just don't have the time. They probably have a number of other children that they have to take care of. They have a farm that they have to help with. They have a house that they have to take care of, and they just don't have the time to kind of play around with all of these mourning expectations. They probably had a black dress that if they were going to church they would wear, or if they knew they were going to be seen they would wear, but it just wasn't as socially important to rural women as it might have been to wealthy women of society in a bigger city. These are 3 women who had their portraits taken at a professional photographer when they were in mourning. The woman on the left is in full mourning. You again can see her long crepe veil. The woman in the middle, while she has a crepe tie on her bonnet, you can see there's some white around the lower edge of her hat. So she probably is in her second year of mourning, probably towards the end of it. And the woman on the right is probably also at that same point. She does have some crepe panels on her dress, but she is wearing a white mourning cap. And if anyone has ever seen Gone with the Wind, you will remember the scene where Scarlet, who is technically in mourning for her husband, but really never loved him, is dressed head to toe in black. She has been allowed to go to this large social function, but she is not allowed to interact with people, let alone another man. And Rhett Butler pays to dance for the option to dance with any woman that he wants to dance with, and he picks Scarlet. And she has broken the cardinal rule of mourning by, number one, being at a social occasion, and number two, being happy and with another man. Everyone is very shocked by this, and as I recall, her aunt faints. So by the 1920s, the practice of having a mourning wardrobe really had declined, although the custom of wearing black to funerals continued for many, many decades, and some people still practice it now. I think in general, people go to funerals in what they're comfortable wearing. And along with your mourning clothing, you had mourning accessories. This is several items from the Sears catalog. They had a little section on mourning items that you could purchase. There's a mourning handkerchief, which is just a plain white handkerchief that was edged in black. And then above that is mourning stationery. One of the whole points of mourning was that it was visual, and even if somebody didn't personally know who you were, they could tell that you were in mourning by what you were wearing. If you sent a letter to someone, even if they didn't know your husband or someone had died, they would certainly know it when they got your letter that was edged in black. And here are just a couple things from my collection. The one on the left is a funeral notice, or really a funeral invitation, that's edged in black. And the other two are thank you cards that would have been sent to acknowledge flowers or condolences that had been sent. And these are memorial cards. They're about 4 by 6 inches. They're very heavy cardboard. And these were often placed in a photo album opposite a photo of the deceased that was made when they were living. And they included usually some kind of poetry or saying on them, some symbolism. You can see the doves at the top. And then always they were printed with the name and birth and death dates, and usually the age of the person when they died. This one is unusual for Mary Denk because it has her picture on it. It is the only one of memorial card of this size in my collection that has a picture. And these are more like what you see when you go to a funeral now, the prayer cards that you pick up. They'll have the name, where the person was born, birth and death dates, some statistics about them on one side, and then perhaps some poetry or a religious image on the back. And again, all three of these are edged in black. This is an item from Wausau from the World War I era. It was customary locally that when a soldier's body was returned after having died during the war, that businesses in town closed during the funeral service. So this would have been put in the window of the store to alert patrons as to why the store was closed. And even into 1945, when Roosevelt died, the columns of the newspaper are edged in black. Hair jewelry was also used to memorialize the deceased, although not all hair jewelry is mourning jewelry. It's very delicate jewelry, very difficult work, and that if it's mourning jewelry would use most likely the hair of the deceased, although I have also seen pieces where it's the hair of the deceased intermingled with hair of their children. This is an advertisement from a Godey's Ladies book, which was a fashion magazine at the mid 18th century. And it's basically saying, send in your hair, tell us which style you want it made into, and we will return this piece of jewelry to you. My assumption is that this jewelry was made by women in tenement buildings, although I've never found evidence of that, but it seems like the kind of thing that would have ended up there. It was very difficult work. If you can imagine trying to braid human hair and make it look like something beautiful, that just would be so difficult. These are actual pieces of mourning jewelry. The pieces at the top are made from the hair of the deceased. There are some earrings at the bottom. There's a ring, a pin, and it looks like a bracelet. And then the pin at the bottom would have a lock of the hair of the deceased in it. And this is one of the more interesting memorial artwork pieces that I have seen. It is done on the inside of a cigar box lid, and it contains a lot of the classical death symbols. And going from left to right, you've got the urn, which is symbolic of the person's remains being in that spot. Next to that is an anchor, which is often representative of the person's soul being anchored in heaven. You have the beautiful monument to the person. There is a cross on the top, and then you can see what appears to be some drapery coming down the sides. The spade that's leaning up next to the tree, and then the weeping willow tree. And the weeping willow tree is really the classic Victorian death symbol. The tree, the spade, and some of the decoration on the monument are made from human hair. And there were casket plates. These were metal, and they were intended to be put into the lid of the casket where all of the fabric comes together in the middle, as you can see here in this baby casket. Right in the middle there, that is a casket plate. Some of them were a lot fancier than others. This one is a beautiful design from my collection, and it is engraved with the name and birth and death dates and age of the deceased. Babies often had one that said "Our Darling" or "Baby." One below it says "At Rest." At Rest was probably one of the more common things that was on a casket plate. And here it is again. This casket plate came with an image of Jesus there, but you also could swap that out and put an image of the person when they were living if you wanted to. And they were often made into wall hangings. This is a framed casket plate and crucifix that came from a child's casket. And you can't really see it very well here, but underneath the crucifix, but above the casket plate, there is a piece of paper pinned to the backing fabric that in script has the name of the deceased baby. And memorial needlework was also very popular. And this piece also has a child's casket and a crucifix on it. My assumption is that the needlework was done by the bereaved mother. And this would have hung on the parlor wall as a remembrance, probably for many decades. Here's a close-up. And this is one for an adult. It has a father casket plate that is surrounded by a rosary that has beautiful purple beads. And you could also get commercially produced memorial pieces like this print. And there's great death symbolism here too. At the top, you can see there are angels holding open the gates of heaven. There's a dove. There's a lot going on here. And these would have then been custom printed with the death information about the person. And here you can see Mrs. Harry Close and also her son, Harry James Jr. Mrs. Close died a week after giving birth to Harry, and Harry died the day after she did. So we're going to talk a little bit about memorial photography, post-mortem photos. You're going to see a lot of pictures of dead people here. Memorial images started being done well before photography. Wealthy families often paid to have memorial portraits painted. And when photography became more widely available to professionals in the 1850s, 1860s, the memorial photo industry just exploded. It was expensive to have everyday professional photos made for your family, and every town did not have a photographer. Sometimes you had to wait for a traveling photographer to come to your town. So it wasn't always convenient. So at a time before families, you know, before every family had a camera and could take snapshots, a post-mortem photo of your family member may have been the only image that you had of them, especially if they were a child. So probably one of the most frequent questions that I get is, why would people take pictures of dead people? And that's exactly the reason. If you had the choice of never having a photo to remember your child by, or to have a photo of them dead, you probably would choose to have the photo of them dead. So this is unfortunately not one of my images. I would love to have this. This is likely in the 1850s. And this is to show that death was not always beautified like it is now. When this gentleman died, and in his professional post-mortem photo, his eyes and his mouth are open, his arms are tied together with fabric, and he looks probably very much like he did at death. He does not look like he did when he was alive. This is the earliest post-mortem in my collection. This is from the 1860s. Early post-mortem photography was usually up-close images of a face if it was an adult. Children were small enough that you could often get their whole body in. But the photography had not yet evolved to the point where the camera and the photographer could step back and capture a bigger scene like they were able to do in the later years, and we'll be looking at some of those. Here's a little girl in her casket holding a sprig of flowers. And I love this one. It's just a lovely photo of this baby with some flowers tucked into her gown, or it could also be a boy, his or her gown. Interesting thing here is the casket plate is on the lid of the casket. And it says, "Our darling," if you can see it right in the middle there. Children are often depicted as a sleeping baby, which perhaps provided some comfort to their parents. The baby on the left looks like it is in a wicker laundry basket that has a pillow in it and some fabric covering it, and that baby is holding a sprig of flowers. And the baby on the right is in a wicker chair propped up on pillows. This baby is again wearing a christening gown, which was incredibly popular, and there is a wreath of flowers above the head. And this baby is laying on not one but two what probably were very colorful piano scarves that would have been in the home. So as photography advanced and the photographer was able to step back from the body, they could capture the entire scene in the home. This is just a great photo taken inside of a home. These are my favorite kinds of post-mortem photos because not only can you see the person in the casket and the floral arrangements, but you get to peek into what the homes were like at the time and see the furniture and the wallpaper and the light fixtures and everything that's sitting around. And there were often a lot of flowers, and sometimes it's hard to figure out where the body is. So I have circled it for you here. And I'm also going to draw your attention to the circle on the left, which is a floral arrangement that has a clock in it. This was a very common thing to have in a floral arrangement for funerals, and the clock was normally put to the time of death of the person. And here's another one. This one's interesting because the lid is totally off the casket and is leaning up in the corner. And you'll notice in the green circle, there is a floral arrangement that says Ruth Hanheiser in it, and that is German for rest in peace. This is Ruth Hanheiser. This is one of the few postmortem photos I have that is actually identified. She was from Wausau. She died in the early 1920s, and you'll notice the casket plate inside the lid. That would have been removed then before the lid was closed. Just an absolutely fabulous scene in the home with beautiful flowers. A little more subdued, gentleman in a casket, not as many flowers as we usually see, but don't know the circumstances. And here's another one with a lot of flowers. This is likely a service in a funeral parlor. You'll note that you don't see anything on the walls. There's not furniture. it doesn't have the homey feel that the previous pictures had. But I want you to notice this light on the lid of the casket. This was a short-lived fad, if you want to call it that, in funeral services, and it was meant to cast a pleasing glow upon the face of the deceased. And I have read about 2 issues that these lamps could cause. One of them was that they could, in some cases, make the makeup or other things that were on the face of the deceased soften and sometimes run or shift. And they were also prone to starting the lid of the casket on fire, neither of which are good things at a funeral. This is another scene at a funeral parlor. And you can really notice, again, the lack of the homey feel, but you can see some of the things that I showed you from the advertisement of a funeral supplier. The torchliere lights in the back, the crucifix, the candles, the plant stands, all of the baskets, the portable kneeler. And this is one of the favorites in my collection for several reasons. One is because I think she kind of looks like Betty Davis. I'm not quite sure, but I love all of the gathered satin fabric around her. And the reason that I've included this one here is to point out her clothing. The family could supply clothes for a burial, just like they do now, or they could purchase a burial garment from the funeral home. And I'm leaning towards that. I think she's wearing a burial garment that was purchased from the funeral home. It does not, it kind of looks like maybe it would be a robe, but no woman would ever be buried in her pajamas or her robe. And it certainly is not a regular dress. So I'm leaning towards it was an outfit that was purchased from the funeral home. And they were often referred to as Restful Garments. And here's an ad from the 1940s from a funeral supply catalog showing some of these that could be purchased. And they would be used if the family didn't have suitable clothing for the burial. And this is interesting. It is the only photo I have in my collection where the casket is sitting on the porch. And this could have been done for 2 reasons that I can think of. One is that the person had a contagious disease when they died and they didn't want it in the house. And the other was that the house just was not large enough to accommodate the casket, all of the flowers, and all of the mourners. I'm leaning towards the first option, that perhaps the person died from some contagious disease. And sometimes it's just the flowers. There is no casket in this picture. This is just the funeral flowers, and this is symbolism galore. You'll notice the clock in the center, which we had talked about before, noting the time of death. The wheel with the broken spoke. The wheel would have been symbolic of the family, and then the missing part, the missing spoke, would be the loss of the person. Have the horseshoe, which appears in many vintage post-mortem photos. I am not quite sure how a horseshoe, which usually symbolizes luck, what that has to do with this, but even now, if you look in funeral flower catalogs, there are horseshoes. And then the last one, of course, is the dove. And photography, or funeral photographers, in addition to doing the body, would also could take the funeral floral arrangements back to the studio and photograph them there. And you'll notice this one has a casket plate in it. And it was also popular to pose the funeral flowers around a portrait of the person when they were living. And there's a casket plate again. And to photograph the casket at the cemetery. And continuing the tradition, I photographed my mother in 2013. Post-mortems are still done today, although they're usually snapped privately rather than having a professional photographer come in, but I'm sure that could be arranged. And on an interesting note, today would have been my mother's 103rd birthday. She was a Halloween baby, so happy birthday, Mother. And I took not just a close-up, but I also took the entire scene with all of the flowers. And we're going to take a little walk through the cemetery now. Cemeteries were great places for symbolism, both before and after the Victorian era. If you remember the slides right at the beginning, I showed the winged skull, remember the skull and crossbones. But But symbolism in the cemetery had evolved into things that weren't quite so gruesome. This is referred to as the Book of Life, and all of these pictures are going to be from Pine Grove and St. Joseph and St. Michael Cemetery in Wausau. But the Book of Life came in several forms. In this particular one, you can see the book is open, and sometimes you will see engraving on the pages which tell you the person's name and their statistics of their birth and death. Sometimes the book is closed to indicate that the person's life is over. There are a number of different ways that the book is presented. There's also an abundance of hands in the cemeteries in Wausau. And one thing I will note here is that just like casket makers and most any other businesses, the monument dealers pre-stocked or pre-made monuments, and then when they were needed, just added the engraving for the person who had died. So this, on the lot of the memorial dealer, a monument dealer would have just had the engraved hand coming down. So unless you wanted to pay extra to have something custom made, you really were at the mercy of what the monument dealer had available as a blank for you to use. So consequently, you're going to see a lot of particular designs. So in the Wausau area cemeteries, you see a lot of the Book of Life. You see a lot of the hand doing different things. Here, the hand is the hand of God coming down from heaven. And you can see that it's holding a 3-link chain, and that one of the links is broken. And just like the wheel with the missing spoke, this is the family chain that has a link broken because of the loss of a member. Here is the hand pointing up to heaven, which is presumably the direction that you want your soul to go. And this clasped hands, the hand on the right, which has the prominent index finger pointing, would be the hand of God grasping the hand of the deceased and taking them to heaven. Drapery also shows up a lot in cemeteries around here, and that was intended to be symbolic or a reminder for the deceased of the home that they had left. And this is just beautifully engraved drapery with tassels on the ends. And this obelisk also has some drapery going on at the top. I can see a Masonic symbol on the right, and each side of this obelisk has information about a different person in the family who had died. And this has an urn at the top. And if you recall, an urn represents that the person's remains are at that location. And this urn in particular also has drapery on the top of it. So you kind of get a 2-for-1 with symbolism. And the Tree of Life also shows up in a number of ways. I'm not sure what Mr. Callan did for a living, but he has an absolutely fabulous carved stone chunk of tree. And this is, again, referred to as the Tree of Life. Sometimes the height of the monument somewhat corresponds to how long of a life was lived. This monument is about 5 feet tall, and it is actually for a family. It's not for a particular person. It has the wonderful scroll coming down the front that has a saying engraved at the bottom that I don't recall what it is. But an interesting thing to note here is, just like the wheel missing the spoke and the chain missing the link, the rope holding the scroll on is also missing a piece, which would represent, again, someone missing because they were dead. And this is a short Tree of Life. This stands about 2 feet tall. This is for a young child, and it has just fabulously carved cherub on it, garlands with roses on them. Lovely, lovely monument to a child. And this is in Pine Grove, and this is perhaps one of the oddest markers I have ever seen. This is for a baby. It is a Tree of Life that is cut so short, it's kind of like a stump. And what's even more unusual is there appears to be a dead dove laying at the bottom of it. And the stones for infants and children often had similar symbolism on it. It would be doves and lambs, angels, roses, things that really portrayed the innocence of the child. And coming a little bit forward in time, this is from St. Michael's Catholic Cemetery on Grand Avenue. St. Michael was the Polish Catholic Church in Wausau, And a tradition in Polish cemeteries is to have personalized photos of the deceased on the headstone. So on this stone, the wife's photo is on the left side, the husband's photo is on the right. And this is a tradition that has carried on into the Hmong culture in Wausau. And there are just some fabulous monuments that again have the personalized photos on them. So personalizing your monument, bringing symbolism forward in time continues to happen. This has always been one of my favorites. Chief Engineer Clifford Trager. This is a great personalized monument. He was a retired engineer with the Marines, and it shows a ship on the left side and an engine order telegraph on the right. And then above the telegraph, it says securely tied off and finished with engines, which is a great parallel to death. And on a little bit smaller scale, personalizing a monument, it is apparent that Kathleen Fail loved flamingos. They are on her monument, and they are also stuck in the ground around her grave. So over the course of about 75 years, families have gone from taking care of sick family members in their home and preparing their bodies when they die, to handling the funeral and the burial arrangements, to paying an undertaker to come to the house to prepare the body and handle all of those arrangements, to having a funeral home pick the body up from the home or even later the hospital and do all of those preparations behind closed doors without the help of the family. So the way families dealt with death, dealt with the death in the family changed forever over the course of those years. Or did it? So where are we now with death care? Are things changing? Have we come full circle? This is a great early image that really is part of the transition from the scary death to the good death. When my mother died, I participated in her funeral. I had done her hair for decades, and this was really going to be the last time that I could do for it and my last act of love for her. And the funeral home encouraged me to do it, I took photos of myself with her casket. And many, many more people are caring for their family and friends after death without the help of a funeral professional. And if you want to personalize your death, there are so many things you can do. There are personalized caskets and urns that are available now, so you can be remembered the way you want to. This is one for a longtime school bus driver. Or it could be if you were a peace symbol and some tie-dye if you're a child of the universe, or if you're a car enthusiast, this is an interesting cremain container. Or you can have a green burial. These have become more common, still not really widely happening, but there is no hard casket and no concrete vault that are set into the ground that will last forever. It's just a wicker container with the body in it, or a shrouded body being placed into the ground to decompose naturally. And that's what has happened for millennia. And I think that is coming full circle. And that brings me to the end. I will throw it back to Ben. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the Facebook comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Kathy, for that wonderful, covered a lot of ground there, which I know is not easy to fit all that in at the level of detail that you did, but you did a great job with that. Again, like Kathy mentioned, please do, if you have any lingering questions or comments, we'll check that. While you're thinking about it, let me just quick share. This is when we would normally talk about our our next one for this series, our lectures. We are done with this particular 2020. We were still working on what's coming up next in 2021. However, we do have History Chats, which is going to be continuing throughout the rest of 2020. So if you're interested in more of this sort of thing, we do these weekly every Thursday at 12:30. This week coming up, we're going to be talking about the county health stuff, the sanitarium, the poor farm, insane asylum. So that's interesting. Yeah, kind of keeping up with that. And then after that, we're going to spend a couple weeks talking about people you should know. So some interesting individuals over the years and their contributions to the community of Marathon County. So it'd be kind of a fun way to do that. So I invite you to come join us for those. We also put those up on our YouTube and you can watch them afterwards if you can't join us for them live. So yeah, let's check here. Let's see. Well, I know, I guess just to start something off here. I know, Kathy, you did mention the, towards the end about all the Polish and sort of having the sort of unique traditions there. I'm assuming that what you're kind of talking about generally is just the broad American experience. Is there a lot of differences, between sort of a German family versus a Polish or a Norwegian or that sort of thing?
I would say that the actual death care and the process of dealing with death and what you did probably was very similar, no matter what your nationality, if you were in this area. But some of the, things like what you did on your monument are, that was the portionalized photos would be something that the Polish people brought over with them when they immigrated. Obviously different religious groups have different ways that they mourn. People in India have a particular things that they do. So it really, different regions of the world, different cultures, different religions certainly have their particular ways of doing things. But a lot of it is regional. Kind of sadly, I think it's sad that to a great extent we have lost a lot of those customs that are particular to our cultures and where our ancestors came from. So I'm very happy, when I see in the cemetery that headstones for Hmong individuals also have those porcelainized photos, because I absolutely love those. It really makes the cemetery and the headstone that much more intimate when you're going to visit people or even just walking through.
Well, it looks like we have a couple people had commented, thanking you for the presentation. June had mentioned that they now make jewelry from people's ashes, which is a nice continuation of the hair, I guess.
Yes, that is like the mourning jewelry of our time. And I do not have any. I don't have anyone close to me who was cremated, but if I did, I certainly would have jewelry made from it. You can have jewelry made from it. You can have it blown into glass orbs. There's so many things that you can do with it. You can also get kits to mix them with like flower seeds and give them out to family and friends so they can plant you in their garden. There are so many very interesting and inventive things that people are doing now to memorialize the dead, and I absolutely love that. That is part of what I consider that whole coming full circle. There was a whole time between the 1940s and the 1980s, I would say, where like all of that, what I consider the really interesting parts of memorializing people just kind of faded away. When you're going to the cemetery, there's just not symbolism on those stones. Death has just, it's become just that. It's just, you lived, you died, you're buried, and people move on. We really stopped doing the, incorporating the casket plates into something that you hung in your parlor for the next 50 years. And I personally think that whole kind of time span in there, there were so many kids who grew up not living in multi-generational houses and not caring for people when they were sick. If somebody got sick, you sent them to a hospital. If somebody died, you sent them to a funeral home. and we were no longer taking responsibility and caring for the dead people in our home. We were farming those tasks out to somebody else. And I think that really gave us several generations of people who really formed a great aversion to death because it was no longer part of their life like it was 100 years before.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question about the unknown soldier in the cemetery. And I guess maybe you could kind of expand this a little bit to say, is there sort of the process of memorializing, public figures or soldiers or things like that? Is that, you talked about maybe a little bit here and there in there. Do you want to, anything jump out there that you want to contribute to that?
Well, do you want to know the story of that monument?
Sure, might as well. Yeah,
I actually have researched this because that is another thing that people often ask me about is, what about that unknown soldier? And from what I have read, I have found the newspaper accounts of it, and that there was a gentleman who was found, I believe, hanging from a tree in Rothschild next to what the highway was, or what we probably think of as Old 51 now. And he was dead, and he had nothing with him but a note in his pocket that said something to the effect of, I would rather have died on the battlefield in France than to have lived the life that I had to come back to and have lived these last years. No name, no nothing. The labels were cut out of his clothing, and a funeral home in Wausau took care of the body, and they publicized around the country that this had happened, and had the person's body laying out at the cemetery in the funeral home for months, for quite a long time. And they were receiving letters from around the country from grieving mothers and fathers who were sure that this was their son, and they would send pictures, and they were never able to connect the dead person with anyone who thought it was their son. And a local veterans group took charge of the body and ended up burying it in the unknown soldier grave in the far right corner of Pine Grove Cemetery. So that's what I know about that.
Oh, yeah. So I guess I just assumed by the question that it was the sort of general concept of the unknown soldier, but we have a bigger story specifically here.
Yes, there is actually someone buried under there. They had a fundraising effort in the community to raise the money to pay for the monument. So it truly is an unknown soldier, assuming he's a soldier. Since I don't know who it is, there really is no evidence that he was, but the note in his pocket would lead people to believe that.
Makes sense, yeah. All right. It looks like Stephen Schweer had, sorry if I pronounced that wrongly, mentioned that Houston, Texas has an amazing museum dedicated to the funeral industry and history. And I know that there are a lot of other people out there that are involved in kind of keeping this story together. Do you have any suggestions if people are interested in knowing more, people to follow or visit?
I have that
Sure you do.
museum in Texas is on my bucket list. I would love to go there. It's the National Museum of Funeral History. If you are interested, there are a number of books that you can buy on not just about the social history of death, but also about collecting the things like I collect. So many people think I'm kind of odd for doing this, and I'm like the only one who does it, but there is a huge community of people, and Facebook has really kind of promoted it with groups specific to people who collect post-mortem photos. You can just, search Victorian post-mortem photos on Facebook, and you will find any number of groups. You just need to be careful that you're in a group of people who actually know what they're talking about, because there is a whole subset of people who think that any person who looks a little creepy in an old photo is dead, and it's just not true. But there are, the Thantos Archive has a Facebook page and a Patreon account, and they also have a website where You can see really good postmortems, but if you become one of their patrons, you get to see the really good stuff. But there is just a huge online presence of people who collect postmortem photos, casket plates, mourning jewelry, mourning clothing. There's a lot of educational resources if you want to learn. So there's a lot of people out there who know a lot about this topic and are just so happy to share it with people who are interested.
Yeah, cool. And as one of those people, we're grateful that you were able to come and share your expertise and collection with us. And I think we'll maybe call it there for the day. Again, thanks, Kathy, for presenting here, and thanks to you all for joining us on this Halloween afternoon.
Okay, thank you.